Hey everyone, welcome to HR Tech Talks. I am Ben Eubanks, your host. I'm so glad to have you here for the conversation. Looking forward to, as always, every single Monday, we're talking to innovative companies in the HR technology space, serving learning and talent and HR individuals, practitioners just like you, to help you solve the problems your business has around talent. So looking forward to a great conversation. Please chime in. Let us know where you're connecting in from. Stephen and I would love to hear from you. Love to know where you're listening from. It's always fun for me, honestly. If I'm going to be a little bit of a data nerd, I love seeing where everybody is, where you're connecting from. We have a lot from the U.S. We also have people internationally. Almost every single show chiming in, listening in. Also, as we go through the discussion today, if something occurs to you, you're curious about something, you want to know, don't be shy. Pop a question in there. Let us know your thoughts, or it's just a comment, right? If you agree, if you disagree, let us know. You're not going to hurt anyone's feelings. You're going to get us excited. We love hearing from you as we're going through the conversation. And so without any further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring up Stephen Bruce. He's the managing director at PeopleFluent. And we're going to talk about all things talent today in the conversation. So Stephen, welcome to the show, sir. Glad to have you here. So go ahead and kick us off. Let us know who you are, what you do.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. I really appreciate it. So PeopleFluent is a broad set of talent management offerings, talent and learning management systems that serve both kind of mid and large enterprise customers, really across an international set of large organizations that are looking to drive talent strategies and deliver some form of business outcomes. Me, myself personally, I'm the managing director for PeopleFluent. I've been here close to a little over actually 12 years. I am an HR practitioner by trade. I spent over 20 years managing HR, running HR in different software companies before moving over onto the business side in a whole host of marketing, product management, services and support, and commercial operations before stepping into the managing director role at PeopleFluent.
Wonderful. I'm going to ask you a question that maybe you didn't expect, but I'm kind of curious here. Do you think your background, I never meet people who are leading organizations that serve HR practitioners that have an HR background. That's a very unique kind of path to take. I'm curious, do you think that helps you? Do you have some experience blindness where you're like, I know all this stuff already? Does it help you in that role? I'm kind of curious how you think that fits with how you are able to serve your clients at the end of the day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I think it's a huge advantage. I think it gives us a perspective and a direction on a product strategy, on a service and support strategy that may differ from other vendors that probably look at it more like an ERP type of a process versus really the fundamental issues. Because from an HR perspective, a lot of the challenge that HR professionals have isn't the systems alone, right? It's not just the usability, deployment, or adoption of a system. It's all of the internal processes that have to happen to make that system be used effectively and deliver a certain outcome. And I think when you have that perspective, it drives a great value. It's the as a service part of SaaS that I think has been missing a lot in a lot of software companies.
I was going to say, the thought that I had, I was kind of curious on that, what you thought, because my thought is you probably hopefully don't ignore the culture piece too, right? That the culture, the process, all those kind of things that wrap into it, where companies often, like you said, they'll go, let's go get that piece of technology to solve that problem, when there are 50 things hooked into it that you're gonna break or make worse, or not even affect any of those other outlying challenges, because you're just looking at technology as the solution to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think again, most financial business, other applications, certainly sales and marketing type of solutions, they're solving a distinct process that they're trying to automate, right? When we talk about humans, it's difficult to necessarily automate a lot of the processes that have to go into how we work as teams, how we work as individuals, what's interesting for us to advance. The concept of journeys is a topic that we've been working on for the last few years, but it's just how do employees and managers work across these different talent processes. And I think specific to your question, when I meet with our internal teams, the question I always pose to them is, how will this be perceived from the lens of an employee versus the lens of an organization? HR is very organizational focused, right? We're here to drive the productivity of the organization. To do that, there are regulatory and statutory things that we have to do. There's compliance related learning, there's policy administration, there's other things we have to do. An employee, when they join a new company, the first thing they don't think about is, hey, I need to sign up for these policies or compliances. They don't care about that. So when we think about onboarding and ramping new employees, if you think, what we're really been working on, what we think the future of where talent is going is the lens of the employee, as well as the lens of the organization, because they do overlap, and they're both incredibly important, but they serve two purposes. And if our software is built from the lens of both of those views, we think it'll be greater adoption, easier to use, less training, and essentially greater value, because all of those things amount to better talent, which amounts to productivity and better outcomes for companies.
Excellent. Thank you for letting me take that little detour there.
Yeah, no worries.
I'd forgotten about your background. I thought that's a question I've never been able to ask. I might never be able to ask again. And so I was glad to jump on that. So the last time you and I connected months ago, we were talking about talent ability, right? PeopleFluent had just made had built brought this new capability in house, I guess. And so I'd love for you to talk about why talent ability is a focus for you as an organization, maybe for your clients. I'm kind of curious to hear what you're hearing from them.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I can give you a couple of examples, one from a very large bank that just merged with another large bank, and they use talent mobility very specifically to address a lot of the reorganization and talent and deployment methods and how they view talent. So if I took a step back on talent mobility, give you the viewers a little bit of a sense. When you think of career development, you think of employee development. There's a whole host of things that have to be involved in that. There's the concept of, do I even understand what the skills and the underlying requirements of the role are? Can I benchmark that skill data against other companies that are in my same industry to understand, am I capturing the skills of the role? If there are gaps in those skills at the individual level, am I deploying some form of mentoring or learning activity to get that skill up for that employee? And that has a whole host of workforce capability benefits, again, to the organization, to the employee. It allows them to advance, grow within their career and retain, right? And drive their own career path. So for us, we really believe there's a huge kind of a gap within talent management systems over the last decade or so that have really looked at of talent mobility as a definitive process. Sure, there's performance management. We need to drive, what goals and so forth have gone through the system. Certainly there's succession planning. There's certainly recruiting and to the sense of internal mobility, because you can have an internal job board. But that's different. Requiring an employee to go out to an internal job board and constantly search for opportunities is much different than the concept of every time a requisition is created, matching that requisition to your internal population skills and people who are interested in a certain location or department or group, and then feeding that, pushing that out to the employees so that they can then advance themselves in their careers. So that's really what talent mobility is. That's why we were so excited when we last spoke about it. And for the bank I mentioned, the reason why it was so critical is you can imagine you're in the middle of COVID, you've just merged two massive organizations, each about 30, 40,000 employees in size. You're redeploying resources, you're doing some reorganization, restructuring, and understanding skills and a skills ontology across all your different jobs is hugely important, because most organizations just rely on HR, that they can build all these from scratch. And that's incredible. And I can tell you, in my roles, it's incredibly difficult to do. Even if you spent, like myself, spent my entire industry in the software space and pretty much knows every role in a software company, from mainframe to mid-range to client server, now cloud and deploy technologies, it's still incredibly difficult to get down to the requirement and skill level, competency level requirements within a role. So rather than have HR try to build these themselves, talent mobility tools like our own have created this concept of, why don't you build those? Why don't you have employees build and submit their own skills and attributes as part of the role, use that to match across a large segment, compare that to external workforce intelligence data, and then match those skills to whatever internal project or internal mobility or opportunity that exists within the business.
We just actually collected some brand new data, and it showed that when employers are trying, so we're talking to TA leaders, recruiting leaders, and they said, we're trying to do better at talent ability. We're trying to focus on this more. And right now we're using the tools we have at hand. Like you were saying, right? We have this applicant tracking system or something, some basic way to do recruiting now. We're trying to use that to solve this problem, but it's not meant for that. And so they're trying to repurpose it. But the second most common way was, we're looking for an internal talent marketplace. We're trying to find a tool that we can build that with. So when Dawn has some extra time and she wants to do some projects and contribute extra, or she wants to use her strengths and really engage herself in her work more deeply, she'll have those opportunities there available that the company has kind of opened up to her. So that was intriguing to find. One of the other things that sticks to me is you talked a minute ago about employees are active participants in this, not just passive, sitting back consuming, but they are active participants, not just in the technology, but now in their career management and what they're doing. And I want to be using my strengths at work. I don't want to just sit back and take whatever someone hands me. And when we did a study a couple of years ago on reskilling, we found that 1 out of every 5 workers doesn't have any clue if their employer knows what their skills are and what their abilities are. And what kind of picture does that create? What kind of environment does that create? I want to hear from you. If you're an employee and you don't have any clue if your employer knows what your skills are and what you can do.
I mean, you can only imagine what that means from an employee morale and retention standpoint. You don't have to look further than the past 30 years in the Gallup surveys on employee satisfaction to get a good sense that employees are not satisfied. I think the central control and command concept of HR, and I don't mean that in a negative way, because again, I spent 20 years in HR, but expecting one group to be able to understand the level of proficiency and skill and competency levels across every job in an organization of 10 or 15, 100,000 employees is just not possible. I don't care how big your HR department is. And so it provides a great value to them. I think for the reason why we got excited into it speaks to kind of the comment that you had made, which is that we were meeting with a company out of Toronto. This is about eight years or so, 10 years ago. It was closer to 8. And they were saying the experience for an employee and a manager to talk about their skills, how they develop within the organization, what next level opportunity they can get to. They're like, that's a core fundamental value that we want to build and strengthen our company. So walk us through from your talent management system how that's done, and just literally role play a discussion, employee and manager, and how does that work within the system. And of course, we met all of the requirements, and of course, all the vendors did. As far as here's performance, here's learning, here's some sort of calibration or 9-box or succession, or there are all of these different elements. And what was interesting, and I think most compelling to us as a team, is when we walked through the process and said, well, there really is no journey. It's clunky. It's really difficult. If an employee says, here's my skill, they're like, well, let's pull up the performance evaluation system and let's just go through your list of KPIs or skills or however your organization manages it. And then they're like, well, what if they're not proficient? Well, let's go into the evaluation and see what the rating said. And then it's like, okay, well, they weren't proficient. So now let's go log into a learning system to talk about courses that you may be able to take to build that proficiency. And you quickly realize over this, we were there a couple of days, you quickly realize that there was such a disconnect for employees and managers to be able to have those conversations that you can only imagine from an employee perspective. It'll be very difficult for them to advance themselves when a manager can't articulate it. It comes off as just, we'll work harder, or put in more time. And those things are so meaningless to an employee. Right?
It's not actionable. Goodness gracious. Part of it is that just transparency and having a common language that we can talk about, because we know what the truth is and we can talk about it. When it's like that, it's 5 different places. It's hard to really say, okay, which one of these is the real truth that we can all go by and agree on, and then use as our foundation for building strengths, building competency, building the skills we need to develop that. You talked about learning in there, and we actually got a good question. Dawn popped it in there, and so I'm going to bring that up really quick, because I think that's part of this too. I talked about like the talent acquisition perspective a minute ago on this, and it's fun because in the last few years, I've seen talent acquisition bring conversations about talent mobility. I've seen CHROs bringing conversations about it. I've seen learning development leaders bring conversations about it, and each of them have a slightly different flavor to it. And I think learning, one of the pieces is, like you were just saying, like this hooks into how we're learning, how we're developing, how we're growing. You talk about that piece of it a little bit, kind of in relation to Dawn's question. So I think that's an interesting component there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great question. And there's in the example I provided, it was a very specific use case of a proficiency level and expanding the proficiency level. But that's just scratching the surface of how learning from a talent mobility perspective can integrate. There's the whole concept of training itself, organizational memory. How do I rapidly create content and deploy that to people who need to see it? How do I get that into their hands and be able to use it? But more importantly, if you have a a learning system that you can deploy and connect to internal mobility, then not only can you send them off to different courses and have them learn and do those things, but in the world that we live in within COVID today, it's less about just connecting a mentor. You can do that within talent mobility. You can then drive into even one-on-one sessions, continuous feedback, and engagement surveys to see how those mentors are working out. Those are all things that that we've been building out as part of talent mobility. From a learning perspective, though, we have to also think in the context of, where we work in a new world today with COVID, where everyone is remote. And so how do I deploy a learning application that has the benefit of the interaction level you and I would have in a dialogue we have right now, but think of that from an instructor and a learner perspective, be able to ask questions, do those things, but deliver it on a 24/7 basis, so it's always available, and then to be able to deliver it in any format, whether it's a telephone or some other method to consume it. And I think that's the modern aspects of learning. It's, can you take all of what we have and whether it's, we brand it as our instilled learning experience platform or part of our learning management system, how do you take those elements to be able to then deploy it so that it can be consumed and used? Because the reality is, in any LMS, for going back to when I first got into the HCM space years and years ago, in the 90s, you could always assign a course. That was not the be end all of learning management. The problem is no one ever actually logged in and actually consumed the course. It wasn't delivered in a way that was appealing to them. It was predominantly compliance based. So then when you start to think about employee related, creating their own content and expanding your knowledge universe outside of this, central learning organization, then it gets really, really compelling, because now you can start to do projects, and the work that your employees are doing on each projects can now start to be tracked and managed. You can, if somebody wants to understand, hey, I'm going out to this specific industry segment to do this project, I want to be able to understand how that was going, how that went. You can literally go into the learning system, search the spoken word, find the 30-second or 2-minute section of the actual training or video, and consume that, and then go on with your day. And that's the future of how you connect talent mobility with learning. It's got to be, it's not just micro learning, because we say that all the time. The reality is, I don't have time for a 3-minute video sometimes, because I'm so busy. You're running from meeting to meeting, you just want to jump in. So I think those are the intersections of where learning fits in extremely well with talent mobility, because it starts to put the emphasis and ownership on the development of the employee in the hands of the employee, where they can advance it, but tied within the overall structure and process of HR, so that it's still tied to job codes and jobs. People can't just, sit and, watch videos all day. This isn't Netflix. I hear this all the time, the Netflix style of learning. There's not a company in the world that wants their employees just to sit and watch Netflix all day. So there has to be a construct, and it's the mirror of combining that learning capability with that talent development capabilities that I think is compelling.
Yeah, the way I always position that is, learning is about performance. At the end of the day, it's about performance. Consuming more learning, or how much someone liked it, or whether it was a positive experience or whatever else, it's about performance at the end of the day. And if the experience, if the content, if that mentor that you talk about pairing with, any of those things lead to better performance, that counts as learning. That's all that matters.
Yeah.
We can move on with our work. You talked about a little bit people doing projects, things like that, right? And again, some of the different tools, they're called gigs, when people do a mini project inside the business. In the past, again, the only source of feedback we have on someone's performance is usually been the manager. I see you do this thing, and I can rate you on that thing, and that's it. But being able to track skills, as I'm doing a project in marketing or in sales or in operations, I'm doing a new project with a team, being able to see, hey, these are the skills that were aligned with that task or that project that Ben had, that team that he was on, and these are the skills at the end of that project that ended up being strengthened by that. I think those kinds of things are really powerful, because
especially for service-oriented organizations where project-based work is incredibly important, and they really need to be able to expand and grow with that. So I absolutely agree.
Don popped another question in there. I'm going to ask it to you really quick, because this has been top of mind for me a lot lately because we just finished this research on talent acquisition. We're about to do a very similar study in learning development with some of those same kind of questions to see if they're in sync or if they're radically different. And I have no clue what to expect. So that's gonna be a fun one. But she said, talk about the concept of talent mobility between HR and L&D, kind of how they see that maybe differently, or how they maybe the same goals. I'm kind of curious what you think about that, because PeopleFluent has a strong background in serving that learning audience, not just in addition to the HR audience. So talk about maybe based on your experience, how those two groups might see it differently or have different kind of outcomes they're looking for when it comes to mobility.
Yeah, I mean, keep in mind they're both driving different outcomes because they're trying to drive a different HR strategy to drive a different outcome. But they're both incredibly important. You have to have both. I mean, I think that's the difference. Is I think organizations are like, hey, let's go buy a tool, let's go buy a learning experience platform because we want an easy way for them to consume and aggregate content. It could be our content, it could be third-party content. Great. But that doesn't solve the needs of the learning organization that has a whole bunch of other process-oriented, policy-oriented, and other training mechanisms that require a level of certification, compliance, as well as a whole host of just programs, curriculums, learning paths that needs to be entity enabled. So I work in the ICU in this hospital 1 week, but I work over here in another nursing unit this week in a different hospital. It doesn't have any of those complexities, and we have to serve both, right? We have to be able to drive both. So I think they serve different needs, especially on the talent development and performance side. There is this concept of how do I get these employees to self-develop, think about how they self-explore, and then how do they develop themselves. And that can be in the form of a formal learning, but it can also be, I bought a book and I want to share that experience and what I learned within a certain different knowledge set with my coworkers, and how do I do that from a learning experience outside of a formal learning program that goes through the learning team. And so that's where I think it's a combination of both that really gets your organization learning. I think the other element to all of this is just once they do the learning and once they advance their skills and so forth, the next question always is, well, how do I advance myself? Like and this is where you get into the recruiting, which is why we were so excited. We launched our next generation recruiting platform last year, because you need to be able to push those recommendations to your employees. You need to introduce concepts of interview scheduling that is fully automated, texting that's fully automated, and other elements to the process, video and video interviews that's fully automated. So you're not having your recruiting teams or your employee teams searching out through all these different applications to find out, okay, now I have to do a video interview, so let me get the login information to do this video interviewing tool. Having that all embedded in one recruiting application, and then feeding off those internal opportunities and pushing those out to the employees through talent mobility, and then having them direct right back into the system. So making it seamless and easy for your employees to use it. I think that's the fundamental of talent development. It's everything from how do I develop, how do I manage performance, how do I get improved proficiency, how do I drive with them learning, how do I learn from the project-based knowledge that my organization never documents or tracks, and have a central repository for that. And then what offerings and tools, both from a career advancement perspective and a rewards perspective, compensation perspective, will the employees engage and take advantage of it?
I'm convinced most HR leaders have a document sitting on their hard drive somewhere that has a title of, HR processes, and it's an empty document that they've meant to fill out for a long time, and they keep I'm going to do that this year and never quite get around to it. And so that's what I thought of when you.
I'm not kidding. I worked for one company twice, and I left and came back 5 years later. The process document I created for recruitment had been copied over. I think they lost the original because you can tell it had degenerated from the millions of copies they've made. It was still in there. When I went back to the company, I said, wow, we haven't progressed. We're still using the same concept of an HR process that I know because I created this thing 5 years ago, but things evolve and grow. So yeah, there's no question that we need to do that. I know we're short on time. The only other thing I wanted to mention on the PeopleFluent side is,
sure,
when you have all of this important information, whether it's recruiting or talent development, like we mentioned, learning, succession, recruiting, it's being able to aggregate that up and have at at both a macro level and sometimes at a micro level to understand that HR analytics and data, and we're launching our analytics, a people analytics platform here at the end of Q2. And it really takes all of the different data elements across these different products and surface those up with organizational data, right? So you understand benchmarking and trends for, are your best people leaving the organization? How do you track your performance by manager, group, title, function? How are you rewarding the best people? Where are all those distributions going? How do you think about your potential versus your performance in different analytic sessions around succession planning and so forth? So I think that's incredibly compelling as well, because now you have the business case data and information to go back to your leadership or your board of directors or your comp committee or whoever you're interacting with as an HR leader. And you're providing them verifiable data that shows the trending and benchmarking of your talent processes and programs through the organization, which I think is critical. I think we as HR organizations are not always our best advocates. I think we tend to fall back on process, and we need to be able to have a system from which we can show these are the outcomes of these different talent strategies, and here's the direct correlation to how it impacted business.
Process is the comfort zone for most HR professionals, I would argue, just because it's what you learn it and you apply that over and over again. I'm glad you brought that piece up, because we did a study last year on agility and HR tech and how that kind of blends together with how an organization can respond to change. And one of the things in that really stuck out, and it ties right perfectly what you're saying, we saw that the more tools a company uses to manage their HR function, if you add in 5 more tools, you can do 5 more things potentially. You can add in some other functionality that you don't have. However, that comes at the expense of clarity. You don't understand what's happening. So you've got data living in 4 or 5 or 10, or Lord help you, even more different places, and you can't keep track of what's happening, what's going on. Just like we talked about in the micro instance of an individual, their performance. If you've got stuff in an OKR system, and then you've got stuff in the performance system, and in the learning, it's hard to keep track of where an individual performance is. An organization is infinitely more complex. And how do we know how well we're doing, what's happening across our entire set of individuals we have employed here if we don't have that stuff in one place? So that's one thing that I'm excited about, is getting really clear on that data, not just to see what happened, what's about to happen, and how to plan for that, how to prepare for that, because the business needs people to do that. In the last year has been the biggest proof, right? Humans, the talent was center stage, and that gave HR a big chance to kind of step up and say, here's what's happening, here's what's going on. And so having that data at your fingertips is so much stronger, so much more valuable than I'm just gonna go with my gut, or here's what I'm thinking, or I feel like this would be the right. No, here's what the data show. Here's what we should be doing.
And I think the critical piece is especially on the PeopleFluent side, we've always had what we consider to be in-application analytics, decision views, and processes. So how do we put the information into the hands of the managers so they can make a better talent decision? Okay. What's been lacking is the ability to take these individual talent decisions across performance or succession, compensation, recruiting, and then get better organizational insights as to what's really happening with talent. And that's the big piece that I think is incredibly compelling, because then you can really start to get a sense for, but then once you track and benchmark it, if it starts to veer, you can drill down right into, well, where is that happening? What region, which business unit, what's going on? Do we need to reallocate training? Do we need to think about the management function within that team? What's causing these? But without visibility into it, you can easily just be plugging along with your standard processes and programs. You could be tweaking them and improving them, but without any real insight as to what's happening to them and how it's impacting your business, and especially your talent, which is what we do. Right?
Yeah. The conversation came full circle, right? Back around to that. Back
to the employee.
So if someone is listening in, they're curious about what PeopleFluent's up to, they want to see the new recruiting tools, they want to learn about the new analytics capabilities. They're about to come out, right? So that's new, the talent ability, and there's so many more things kind of happening behind the scenes. We need 2 hours probably to get to all of those in the conversation. Yeah. What's the best way for someone to connect with PeopleFluent?
Yeah, the best way is peoplefluent.com. Just go right to the website. You can reach out directly. You can request a demo right from the main site. You can drill down into the individual product pages and understand if it fits your business unit. Does it fit your size, scope, and scale? We really serve market segments on the low end and the SMB all the way to the mid and large. A lot of our experience is more on the larger sized industries, but we've really expanded out into the middle market and really provide solutions that we think are simple. They're delightfully easy to use and amazingly feature rich. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. You want to have capable products that can be easily deployed and used, and that's what it's about. But peoplefluent.com would be the best place to really reach out and contact us.
Wonderful. Well, hey, I've really enjoyed the conversation, Stephen. Thank you so much for hanging out with us. We appreciate having a fellow HR professional by trade with us, and I'm also excited just to hear what's going on in your world. So thank you for taking some time today.
Thanks, Ben. I really, really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Goodness, that was fun. I enjoyed it. And again, like I told you, we don't get that very often, where we get someone who has that background and can bring multiple perspectives to the table like that. So I hope you enjoyed the discussion today with Stephen Bruce at PeopleFluent. I learned some interesting things about them. I thought I knew everything, and here I am learning some new things. So I appreciate you for hanging out with us. Appreciate you for joining us, for the comments. Erica, Tiffany, Arjun, thank you so much. Dawn, appreciate all of you for chiming in and for joining us today. And for everybody else out there watching the replay, thank you as well. You can always connect, learn more, subscribe, hrtechtalks.org, and join us next week. We'll have another great conversation with our innovative company serving the HR tech space at HR Tech Talks. Thank you so much. Have a great week.